Hello and welcome to the Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by Jonas Carpenter. Jonas, thank you very much for coming on.
The Business of Betting podcast is proudly brought to you by the Betfair Hub from Betfair Australia. No matter where you are in the world, if you want expert articles from pro punters, from building automated models to betting psychology, check out the Betfair Hub. betfair.com.au/hub. Gamble responsibly.
Today I'm joined by Jonas Carpenter. Jonas, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks for having me.
That's my pleasure. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to digging into some of these topics that you've been involved in throughout the years. So, as we always seem to do, let's just start with back to the beginning. How did your life start out, and how did it lead you towards the betting and trading world?
Yeah, sure. So, early in my career, I actually wanted to be a pro golfer. So I pursued that from, I guess, age of 15 or 16 till about 20. And that was my first love. And I was decent at it. Probably could have turned pro, but I think it would have ended up being a grind. I would have been one of those battling tour pros out there. And I think I probably came to that realization when I was about 20. And then I thought, what next? And I'd always been, I guess, fascinated by numbers and the concept of trying to find edges. So I did a quant finance degree at Sydney Uni, and from there ended up in doing a bit of part-time work at a hedge fund, just doing some back testing of some strategies, and that was right during the GFC. So it was like a really fascinating time to be in the markets. And then I guess soon after that hedge fund CEO introduced me to one of his friends who was running a prop firm, and that's where my career started. And then, so I was primarily in options market making over that 4 years, and that was a really interesting space. Then after, about 4 years into that, the volatility really died in the market. So there wasn't too much opportunity there in that game, at least at that time. So I thought, what's next? And I noticed Bet365 had opened up an office in Sydney. So I thought, okay, there are a lot of principles, I guess, that are relevant to bring over from the trading world into the betting world, especially from an options market making side, where essentially you're pricing up the probabilities of stocks, of indexes moving through certain levels. You're trying to price, I guess, a future probability distribution of prices. So I got in touch with Bet365 and had a few chats, and long story short, started there pretty soon after that in their in-play team. And that was a pretty fascinating role. I was sort of focusing on, I was a generalist plus a golf specialist, if you like. So covering about 15 of the core sports, purely in play. And then golf in play, I was kind of the Asian time zone head of in play golf, if you like. And that was due to my background in golf. Golf's a really fun sport to try and price in the run because there are so many variables. You kind of need to understand the course, what the score distributions are, what the players' strengths are, what the conditions are like. You've got incomplete information. So I really enjoyed that in-play golf side of things. Whereas the generalist role wasn't quite as intellectually stimulating, if you like. But yes, I was at 365 for about 5 years, and that was a good stint there. And then I guess I thought I was sort of hitting a plateau there just in terms of my development. And I thought, and I've always been kind of half ambitious, so just wasn't quite getting what I needed there in terms of career. So I decided to just jump out and just have a crack on my own, doing various things. And I've been involved in a few projects since then, and I'll go into Edge Alerter in a sec, but been involved in a crypto project where we tokenized the Perth Mint's gold. So I was involved in that for a few years, consulting to them. I started my own startup, which is it's called the Happiest Hour. It's a food and drink specials platform. And then the other project I was involved in is Edge Alerter, which I started a couple of years ago. And I guess Edge Alerter, and we'll go into that in more detail in a sec. But that's all about helping punters do a couple of things. One, take advantage of the sport and racing promotions that are out there. We've got quite a unique model into how we yield edge out of those. That's quite different to many others. And then the second thing is we educate members on a bunch of things, including the numerical component to betting, and really how I'm bringing over a lot of the principles of professional trading to betting. So helping members sort of understand core principles there. The second thing is I've got some training around sort of how the bookmakers view customers, and that's quite interesting to know. If you're going to take the bookmakers on, it's useful to know kind of how they view the other side, how they view customers. So that's useful information. And the third thing that we educate members on is the psychological component. And again, simple principles from the professional trading world, but there are some really core principles there that can help bettors as well. So yeah, I guess that's how I've gotten to here, and now EduLoader is continuing to grow quite fast. So I'm focusing more and more time on that.
Geez, mate, you must be hitting retirement age shortly then with all that.
Maybe in terms of blood pressure, but not age yet.
So take me back to the quant trading stuff. The prop trading stuff, because it sounds terrifying that someone straight out of university gets a job at a prop trading firm. I'm sure they have a million redundancies in place, and they're probably not just handing you a bankroll day one. But at that time, and maybe even reflecting upon that now, were you a genius? Were you straight out of the gates knowing everything and knew exactly what to do, or was there some form of a learning curve for you when you got into that role?
Yeah, definitely not a genius. Maybe I thought I was somewhere towards a genius, but the trading world, look, it's it can be really brutal. Like, you can really learn some humbling lessons very quickly. I mean, out of my first role was that analyst role at that hedge fund, and I guess that was a real soft entry into it. I wasn't trading the firm's capital. It was about back testing. It was about optimizing. So I guess I learned some useful techniques there. But my first prop trading role, yeah, that's certainly high pressure in that there was no salary. It's a pure profit split. It's what's known as an arcade model. You get funded, you're on a profit split, and if you're profitable, then they'll give you more size to trade, and you can even justify a higher profit split out of that as well. So the way that worked was, what I've explained there, and then it was really a matter of getting trained up on some core things around how markets move, some basics on technical analysis and how that may or may not help. And then it was really, you just got your trading ladders in front of you and a mouse in your hand, and it's good luck to you, do your best. So that prop trading role is pretty, it can be very humbling for many people.
For those that haven't been in that space, would you describe it more on the scale towards gambling, or is it really structured and organized and plenty of different safety nets, and it'd be very hard to get yourself into a lot of trouble like you could at a casino, a racetrack, or on a sports book if you're left to your own devices?
Look, I think that probably the best comparison to the betting world would be, and I think it's actually very similar, would be, imagine you've got some people who think they've got some edge in trading sport on Betfair, whether it's cricket, tennis, or other sports where there's a really liquid Betfair market. So imagine you give those people a couple of ladders, so you can see the order book, you can execute exactly where you'd like very easily. You've got some basic tools around pricing, and frankly, just letting them go from there and come up with their own theories and ideas, trade in and out, whether it's on a really short time frame. Basically, just do what they can to generate some risk-adjusted P&L. That's probably the best comparison to that role. So whether you deem that gambling or not, probably just comes down to how you define it.
And what portion of it involved intuition, or involved, that feeling or gut feeling or whatever you want to call it, as opposed to, following the rules as they can be mathematically or otherwise?
Look, gut feel's probably a good one to have as an overlay over on top of a really structured approach. So in my experience, at least, the traders that I've seen that have been the most successful, and look, markets change all the time. It really depends on the industry that you're trading, whether it's crypto or the traditional world or sport. But in my experience, those that have been the most successful have a really systematic approach to it. They measure things on a daily, weekly level, and then they overlay that with what you mentioned there, the gut feel component. So if something looks, too good to be true, perhaps don't go all in on that because you may have missed something. So that gut feel sense check can be quite useful. But it's really important also for most people to have a relatively systematic approach as well.
Tell me about day one when you walked in the doors at the corporate bookmaker's office, and you might have had expectations, I would imagine, but having some experience at the prop trading firm, was it what you expected, or were there some gaps, or were you surprised at how sophisticated it was?
Yeah, good question. I think the Bet365 have a really good in-play product. They're probably the market leaders in that. So they do a lot of things really well to be able to create that. Certainly from a trading side, from a tech side, they're not where the leading prop trading firms are at. It's kind of next level in the trading world. But having said that, they're a pretty impressive setup as well.
And then when you had those discussions, I'm guessing obviously the experience playing golf made sense, and obviously the experience at the firm, you might have had both that feel for the game, let's call it, or feel for what's happening on the golf course, as well as some of the technical elements that are needed. Did you think that was exactly what you wanted to do and you wanted to go and do the golf stuff, or did you have other ambitions to do different sports, or you wanted to move around more broadly? And I'm guessing you would have done plenty of that as well, but it seems like golf might have been a focus, at least from the outset.
Yeah, I guess I made it clear that golf was a sport that I was interested in, but I was aware that it was going to depend on where the customer demand was, where the big flows are. And look, to be honest, golf, it's not a very highly bet on sport. It probably doesn't even show up in the top 30 or 40 most bet on sports in the run. So because of that, there was less of a need for it. So I guess I made them aware that was something that I'd like to do, and I certainly did as much as I could there. They gave me all the high level stuff, or high top tier stuff in our time zone. But then you sort of get pushed into all the other sports where there's significant demand, like, believe it or not, table tennis, as most people know now.
So when you see some pretty sharp bets coming in, or over a period of time you notice that, whether it's golf or whatever it might be, how do you go about deciphering that? Is it just something that you factor in, and when you see those coming in from that ID or that person or whatever it might be, you just factor that into what you're doing through manual adjustment, let's call it, or how do you decipher what's coming in from the punter side? Because I think it's likely that there's punters out there that are probably better overall than a corporate bookmaker or the betting market over time. So I'm curious how on the bookmaker side you factor that in.
Yeah, absolutely. Some customers have edge over the bookies on some markets, but with regards to sharp betting, I think first we need to just quickly determine what a sharp is. So sharp better is someone who's suspected of having edge over the bookies over certain markets. Now, the key word there is suspected, because there's an important part to working out who a sharp is, and it's not all. It's kind of part art, part science. So you need to take that into consideration. But ultimately, with regards to reacting flow, it's all about how confident you are in the price. So obviously, top tier leagues versus lower leagues, there's a big difference there in your confidence level there. Looking at the liquidity of the betting pools in those markets, obviously the more of that there is, then the more you're going to respect the market. Then you might even look at your relative edge over pricing something over the competing bookmakers, and if you think you've got an edge there. And with sharp flow, differentiating that from just broader flow, really you're just overweighting its significance, or at the very least respecting it to the point where you'll have another look at what your prices are, just to sense check things. So another interesting thing when you talk about how do you react, is the mandate of bookies is quite different across the board. So for example, the smaller bookies, they'll generally have a mandate to trade a far flatter risk profile. So that means they'll be a lot more willing to move prices dynamically in order to flatten their book. Whereas the big corporates, essentially they're running big casinos that are very, very well diversified. So if they've got a large exposure on game A over there, as long as they're laying the right price, they're kind of happy because they know in the long run that's the optimal way to do it. Then the other thing I'd add is in play is, and that was the team that I was in. It's pretty unique in that it's so dynamic. Every second, every minute that goes past, there are various factors that are, or there are various factors that are decaying over time. Obviously, all the inputs that go in to the models. The model has assumptions. Some of those are, perfect. Some of those are very questionable. So, I guess as a trader in play, it's almost like a quant trading role in that ideally you understand how the model works and you understand its weaknesses, so that you're able to use that to work out how confident you are in the prices. Because there are during games you'll certainly be far less confident in your prices at certain points, whether that's at the coming up to the end of a half in soccer where there's some variance around how much extra time there's going to be. The end of a golf tournament when you've got a couple of holes to go, you've got a lot of what's known as gamma in pricing. So each shot means a lot of significance in terms of price. So that's also needs to be factored. So I guess in summary, you've got a number of factors that come into play when you're trying to solve the problem of what is the optimal way to react to flow.
How much did things evolve over those 5 years when you were there? Was it something that start and end points were relatively similar, or was it taking giant steps throughout that period, whether it was, speed of technology, the data, the information flow from the market, those types of things, were they really accelerating at that point?
I think they made reasonable steps forward for sure. It's a big organization. They can't move, they can't be super agile, but I think they made some good headway over that 5 years. Yeah.
What was the, I guess, impetus to leave? I know you talked a little bit about it before, but were there things on the tip of your tongue in terms of jumping into next, or was it just one of those things that that chunk of time was enough there and you wanted to move on to the next sort of challenge for you?
Yeah, so I guess I was on a good growth path there, but it was probably more linear than anything else. So I was still relatively young, even though you suggested earlier that I might be close to retirement age. But yeah, I guess I was just a bit more ambitious than what they could offer, so I thought I'd have a crack myself. We left on very good terms. They mentioned I can come back if I'd like. But I guess I wanted to have a crack on my own on various projects.
So what came next after that? Because I'm guessing with that background and the way the world's heading, towards digital and online and the internet and all those types of things, there's probably plenty of options for you.
Yeah, there were a few options. I'd been involved in the crypto world a little bit during my time at Bet365, so I was certainly open to things in that game. That was just before the real bubble of 17, 18, although that doesn't look like a bubble anymore. So I was open to opportunities in crypto. One other thing that I'd developed while at Bet365, I mentioned earlier, was that platform called the Happiest Hour. So I wanted to give that, got a couple of co-founders on that. We wanted to give that a good push for 6 months and just get that to a really self-sustainable user level. So that connects people with, as a pub owner, you download, you log in and put all your food and drink specials on there, and then on the customer side, you just find all the happy hours and food specials in one platform. So I wanted to give that a push. So we did that for 6 months, and we got it to about 70,000 users, and that's a self-sustainable business now. So that was good. That was my main goal. And then I had been involved, like I mentioned, the crypto thing. So I ended up working for a project that tokenized the Perth Mint gold. So that project's now been live for a year. So I was just sort of consulting to them. And then the third thing was this, I always wanted to try and get back into the betting world in some way. I thought through my background in professional derivatives trading especially, and then with a bit of a stint in betting, there are a lot of principles from the professional trading world that I think can be applied to the betting world. And that's not going to surprise any of your listeners here. But I thought specifically just Joe Punter out there who's betting on whether it's races or sport, I think there's a gap there as far as Joe's unable to find really good unbiased information that has no conflicts of interest, and I'll go through what I mean by that in a sec. So I basically started, I went to the races one day. It was nearly 2 years ago, just the Randwick races with some mates. And so I saw all of a sudden, half of my friends there, they were loading up their betting accounts and just throwing darts. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, like these guys, mostly really smart guys, they've basically got zero chance of being long-term winners. Maybe there's something that I can just help them with in the next 4 hours while we have a few beers and have a few bets. And so what just intuitively came to mind was these racing promos where you get bonus bets back for second and third. So basically I advised my mates to just, if you're going to have a bet, only bet on those, and I'll tell them which horse to back. And through some simple odds comparison, I was able to just get them relatively close to fair value on most runners. And long story short, they sort of followed that, not just that day, for a few weeks, and turned a few $100 into about $600 or whatever, with low variance, importantly. So I think that was really the genesis of the idea here with Edge Alert. I thought, well, okay, there's a lot of edge in these promotions if you know what you're doing. There are some smarts around bonus bet conversion. You can really break down the maths there. So I thought those two things, maybe there's an educational component as well. There could be a product in that. So I basically did a little bit of light marketing, and within sort of a month I had about 20 paying members, and it was just a 3-hour Saturday job for me, which was fun anyway. So basically this initial group of 20 paying me about $50, $100 a month. I basically tipped them Saturday races for about a year, and that was good, and that was growing organically. And then over that time, I thought I kept getting more and more members just sort of demanding or asking for more education on how to exactly optimize this system, how to calculate edge in other different markets. So that got me to build out sort of a bunch of education on that. And so things like really simple things, I'm not reinventing the wheel here, but went through things. I guess on the educational side, there are 3 parts to it as far as what I've built here for members. There's a numerical part, and that's really about how do bookies price markets, how do they use margin, how do they skew prices, how do you translate odds into implied probabilities, expectancy, like what is expectancy, what's market's implied expectancy versus your expectancy, simple things around sample sizing, how that translates to actually deriving some sort of signals out of data, stake sizing, the importance of that, etc., etc. So there's a numerical component. Then the second part of what we help members with on is on the bookmaking side, which you mentioned Bet365 and my background there. But so I've created some information on how the bookmakers see customers. So through some simple things around how they profile, how they view lifetime value of customers, etc., etc. And then the third thing that we teach members is on the psychological side of things as well. So just simple psychological biases that we have that tend to work against us, not for us. So it's good to be aware of them. So yeah, that's kind of how it grew until sort of mid last year. And then mid last year, I thought I need to start freeing up my weekends, especially Saturdays. So since then, at that point, I hired some smart guys out of uni who help with the operational day-to-day of Edge Alert.
What have you found with respect to the psychology or mentality of some of those users, whether it's, your mates at the racetrack who throwing darts and then want to use a product like this or others? Because it's one of those things where, even thinking back, a couple of decades ago, the information that was available was rather limited to maybe a radio station, maybe a little bit of a television programming, plus, the newspaper or whatever it might be. And you fast forward today where there's podcasts, there's videos, there's Twitter, there's information everywhere. Trainers have their own, outlets where they send information about different horses, and it's pretty crazy. And either one of those, it's tough to sift through everything you need to get to the outcome. So is it one of those things where everyone's yearning for products like this so that they can, I guess, change the way they go about spending their recreational money?
Look, you're right. There's so much information out there. You could find dozens and dozens of resources that take you through everything that we take you through, I guess, with Edge Alerter. It's so how, but I think at its core, the best way to learn not just this, but many things, is to apply it in a real world setting. So applying these principles in betting is, well, in any environment, but in this case, betting, really bring them to life after a while. You can sort of say, okay, right, that's why we didn't go all in on that. Okay, that makes sense. That's why we didn't draw too much of a signal from just that factor. Okay, right, cool. So after a while of applying a system or applying these principles, whether they're these principles or other, I think that's where you can really learn and embed those concepts in your mind. And I think what's interesting as well, and many of your listeners will be well aware, is that a lot of the principles in betting are very applicable to the general financial world as well. So kind of going in reverse to what I've talked about, over the last 20 minutes. But yeah, a lot of these principles, as you know, Jake, yourself as well, you can apply to the general investing world. So an easy example and a common one, unfortunately, is you'll hear of the hot tipster of stocks, and it's okay. Look, he's tipped something that's up. He tipped Tesla. Oh, he tipped Afterpay at $9. He bought that, and wow, he's made 10x, etc., etc. But it's like, well, hang on a minute. Doesn't mean we need to just follow him in on his next tips. He's most likely just throwing darts. So I think being aware of that learning that in the betting sense will make a lot of people just more aware in the general financial world. And I guess you could even apply it to a lot of principles in the general world as well.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's a tough one because it's been around as long as gambling's been around, and it's still, strangely, I think if you graphed it out, you wouldn't see a huge spike in terms of people's understanding of those things. It somehow cuts pretty deep in terms of our natural instincts to gravitate towards that kind of thing, and that's what makes this tough, because I think I've said many times before and even written about a little bit in terms of sometimes the boring, low-cost index fund way of investing, or whatever the equivalent you want to talk about in horse racing or sports, isn't always glamorous, and maybe that's not necessarily going to attract as many people as the high volatile world of sort of mutual funds and hedge funds and that type of thing. But if you look into even just the very basic numbers of that type of stuff, these hedge funds don't stay around very long, and most of them don't stay highly rated for more than a year or a couple of years. And with all that said, it's still crazy that that's the path that many take. And I'm guessing there's plenty of similarities when it comes to the market you're in, and even just some of the market companions, let's call them, that try and occupy this space.
Yeah, look, the tipping industry in Australia overall leaves a lot to be desired. Sure, there are a few good offerings out there, but I'd say over 90% easily are operating under false pretenses, or at the very least, they're over-promising and under-delivering. And we've recently actually done some pretty exhaustive research into the tipping industry, and we found quite a few interesting things. So I'll take you through just sort of the summary of what we found. On the market sizing side, so you've got around 800,000 Australians following these services. On the tipping provider side, you've got just over 100 of these tipping services, in quotation marks, if you can even call some of them that. Of those tipping services, over 20% claim to be Australia's best. That is a ridiculous stat in itself. So you've got these false claims flying around all over the place. On the results side, you've got only 10% of these services actually providing a full track record of their performance. As we've discussed, I come from a trading background, and in that game, track record is everything. So to see 10% providing a track record of their performance seems quite incredible. And importantly, many of those that don't provide a track record, they'll still have a headline figure that they advertise, whether it's we have a strike rate of 40% or 70% or whatever. So you've got all sorts of headline numbers flying around, but when you ask for the data, nearly all of them don't provide it to you. Then the other thing that we found is in conflicts of interest, and in particular, if the affiliate model. So the affiliate model is really common in business in general. It's got a good place in many pockets of business in general. It's very common in the betting world, and I think it's quite relevant and fine for the most part. However, where the affiliate model should not be applied in the betting industry is with regards to tipsters. You should not be a tipster and an affiliate, and it's really simple why. The affiliates, they're incentivized and in fact paid based on how many losing punters they refer. So they'll get trailing losses of punters. So you don't really want someone who has that financial incentive to be sending you tips. So that's pretty obvious as to why. The other thing we found is, and again, just on the affiliate model, it's fine if you've got a business model and there might be a conflict of interest. It's pretty important that you are upfront about that, and that's par for the course, as many will know in the financial world. At least it's reasonably well so, but only less than half of those that are affiliates actually make any reasonable attempt to disclose that. So there are some disclosure issues there. So how does that? So you wrap up all those numbers. What's the end product for followers of these services out there? Well, when you size adjust for the number of followers to each service out there, based on our research, you've got around 500,000 Aussies following services that either have no track record or have this affiliates and tipster conflict of interest. So, and look, we get members all the time asking us all sorts of questions, and sometimes those questions are about alternative services, and we also get some reports of how some of these others operate. And we had one a couple of weeks ago, for example, and this one is a tipping service, and it's got over 100,000 followers. And one of our members was just asking them how their performance has been historically, and they replied to him and said, "Yeah, we win at 72%." So the member just asked, "Well, hang on a minute, what does the 72% mean? Is that your strike rate? Is that your ROI? Is it your profit on turnover? What sort of a data, time window are we looking at there?" And the way they responded to him, Jake, was they gave him a thumbs up, just a thumbs up emoji, and then banned him from the page. So that's disgusting. You've also got reports, and we hear about these I'll hear about these maybe about once every month. You'll get cases where a member has subscribed to another service, a paid service, and then one day that service will just disappear. The Facebook page is gone, Telegram's gone, website's gone, and they've already paid them X amount for 6-month membership, whatever. And then not only that do they just disappear, but then then there are a few weeks go past, and then there are very strong suspicions that the same guys have just started all over again under a different brand. So, look, I've got a professional trading background, as you know, and in that game, track records need to be shown, claims need to be audited, and look, frankly, if you're found to be misleading anyone, then your reputation is dead. So, look, the tipping industry, it's got a long way to go here.
How much of it is on purpose or like purposeful, ignorance of things? Because even if I wanted to convert this podcast and the Twitter feed and whatever else into a tipster, I could probably do a decent job, I would imagine, by just being, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert either. I'm an interested party or whatever you want to say, but I could, even now, the NFL's on at the moment. I'm an NFL fan, and there's sports books that have no vig or even money, so $2 in Australia or plus 100 here in the US, where I could, quite easily just go and bet whatever size bet I want on either side, and I'm going to get my money back. It's literally how the math works. So I could do that, and then after the game, just post the winning one and obviously leave behind the losing one. Or I could, even some of the stuff you're talking about money back for first and second, I could probably have a few decent sized bets on some even money chances in small fields who I think are probably likely to finish in the top couple, and do that type of stuff and be very sneaky about it. And obviously, if I'm doing that affiliate stuff as well, then the conflict of interest is brought to life. Is it something that you think is done in a sophisticated way that should be sort of pointed out, or is it one of those things where maybe it's just naive people that don't fully understand some of these things to the level they should?
It's to a degree, but a little bit of both. It's a little bit of A, a little bit of B, but it's way too. I'm not saying there needs to all of a sudden be regulation in this, but there needs to be. I think education is going to help people get a bit sharper on this. But unfortunately, deep down, people are just gullible in this game. They want quick money. They fall for the last tip being a winner. So it's really what I tell members is ask if you see any other services out there. Do two things. One is ask them if they're an affiliate, and secondly, ask them for their full track record. If you can't get answers to both of those questions, then forget about them. If they're an affiliate, be very really tread with caution there, because there is a conflict that you need to be aware of. So those are really the two most basic things, and then I guess there are various other components to it as well, as in okay, there might be a tipster up 50% in the last month. Well, is that true edge, or did they just have a lucky run? Look, there's a great example of maybe it was about 30 or 40 years ago, the way stockbrokers used to hustle customers. So they'd look at the top 100 companies in the S&P, and they'd send stock tips to just randoms, and they just drop them off in mailboxes. They'd drop 10 stock A into mailbox over there, 10 of stock B over there, etc. And then at the end of the year, they'd look at the top 10 performing ones, and then they'd go back to those and go, hey guys, remember that letter that I sent you? And they'd convert quite a lot of those. So there are in this industry, in this tipping industry, there are a lot of hustlers out there, and there's a lot of room for improvement. So to anyone out there who's following a service, I'd just say, just ask those two questions. Are you an affiliate? And secondly, can you give me your full track record? And then on that full track record, you try and work out if that's true edge or not, or have they just got 2 weeks of data and they've had a couple, they've had one $20 winner, and that's explained all their
I've heard the Twitter version of that as well, where people just set up 10 Twitter accounts and start pumping out some bets, and the chances are one of them is going to do pretty well, and they'll just continue on with that one and burn the rest and keep doing that over and over until they keep getting sort of their audiences built that way, which is pretty scary. Do you think it's getting worse? Do you think it's sort of stagnated around where it's always been at, or what's your impression over the last couple of years, especially of how this is going?
Look, to be honest, I haven't been that familiar with the tipping service until sort of the last 6 months, during which I've been researching it. So I don't really have much of a gauge on or finger on the pulse of how it's trending. I know that there are certainly some high profile tipsters coming into the market now, offering really some good systems and some decent education. So they're certainly helping raise the bar. But I don't really have a finger on the pulse on how the more general tipping service is trending. One thing I'd say is that there are some services out there, like to your Twitter example, that they'll throw darts for two months, and if they don't perform, they literally just close down and start all over again. So there are quite a few of those, which is pretty disgusting, to say the least.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you on that for sure. So tell me about the psychological component, because I think one of the things that certainly is probably missing in a lot of the bad examples out there is trying to help each individual with their betting and gambling. And I think one of the under-discussed areas with that is that it expands beyond that. It expands into life and how to generate wealth, whether it's a small amount or a large amount or whatever you're trying to achieve. I like the idea of, the example of teaching someone how to fish rather than, just handing over the fish. And
yeah,
that's something that I think the benefit of that goes well beyond just any individual bet or any individual weekend of gambling or any individual calendar year of understanding betting. And how is that something that you focus on is well received, or is it something that you let people go and find themselves, and they need to be someone who's willing to be curious and wants to dig into those topics further? Because some of them can be dry, or overall it can be dry, but I do think there's sort of a wealth of information out there now around sort of cognitive bias and some of the things that we need to try and get on top of, and that spreads beyond just our gambling.
Yeah, I'd say probably a third of the membership are interested in the psychological component. So Yeah, like as far as when I started this, I thought it'd really be about just look, I've got a system, I've quantified the edge, I've proven it through some results over a statistically significant period of time. I think I can just that alone, I can most likely there is a small chance that that was due to luck, very small chance, but I'm pretty confident that that is a system that wins. So that's kind of how I started it, and I thought, okay, well, I'll just tell other people how what to do and when and what to look for, and that's I'll try and monetize that. That's kind of how it started. But then yeah, over time of teaching them how to fish, I guess on the model side, like our racing model looks purely at price fluctuations in that last minute. So price and volume data across on Betfair, but across all the corporates, how they're moving in that last minute, and we generate signals from that, and we can get basically extremely close to fair value on every tip. The model calculates the chances of it running second and third as well, and then it identifies edge of 30% or greater, and when it does that, we send a signal out to members. So that's kind of how that works, and we're transparent about that to members. We're like, yep, that is how the model works. Like if you want to try and create that yourself, go for it. But that's how that works. Then we back to you teaching them how to fish. We've got some docs, or they're tools, but really they're just Excel sheets that I've created. But these Excel sheets, they break down the value in races. So it's like, okay, if it's $4 there, it's 420 on Betfair. The implied probability is X. Blah 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 blah. Look at the market in the place odds. Look at the place market, etc. etc. We sort of break down the maths of how that all works. So a lot of members are doing that on races that we don't cover. So they're fascinated by that. And I'd say about a third of members are really fascinated in all that side of things. Then on the biases side, that's for some, that's just not of no interest at all. But I think maybe there should be more of a push towards this. Someone should, whether it's the educational providers out there or other, I think these cognitive biases play a far more significant role in people's lives generally, but in gambling and investment than people realize. So that's probably an area that we'll continue to develop. And I'll go through kind of the main ones that I think are of relevance here. So statistical significance, that all sounds fancy to some, like your listeners will be well aware of what that means, but people just have a tendency to rate a tipster or an investment manager on their last result or two. We seem to massively overweight recent results. So that's something to be, you could call that recency bias. So that's something that we all need to be aware of if we're trying to be in this industry as certainly as a profitable trader. Confirmation bias, I think, is super interesting as well and super relevant. We've all got our own subconscious theories as to and hypotheses as to what might happen next and where there might be a mispricing, but we tend to see the evidence that positively reaffirms that more so than the negative, the counter evidence. So we've just got a tendency towards that for some reason, and it's important to be aware of that. Loss aversion. I mean, this is really well researched in the traditional finance world, but basically we derive, and again, your listeners will probably be well aware of this, but we derive less positive utility out of say $100 gain than we do pain out of a $100 loss. So that's something to be aware of, number one. But then how do you apply that? Well, I think stake sizing is a real simple way to manage that bias. And then, look, there are a bunch of others that we could go into, but they're probably of less relevance here.
Yeah, I think they're all really helpful, and I think it's partly on all of us to talk more about these and assess when they're creeping in. And that's not always that simple, but I think it's getting far better and far more common these days than it was previously. I mean, I think growing up, never heard any of those different concepts, or they weren't around as much yet. And as sort of, you get further involved and deeper into the gambling world, and what gets connected to the gambling world or the finance world are some of these things to help augment that. Because, yeah, it really it really opens your eyes once you start sort of applying some of these in the the real world. It can get pretty dizzying as well when you combine a fair few of them, but I do think it's really valuable, not just in the gambling context, but more broadly. And I'd be interested to see how it gets applied in the next decade, because I think it's still in its sort of infancy as it applies, towards gambling games like horse racing and sports especially. But I'm curious to see, these educational platforms, these support platforms for punters out there that do a good job, how they're able to implement them into the real world. So I don't know if you have a sense of that, but I do think it's one area that, for those that are willing, there's plenty of meat on the bone there.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of room for improvement in that. I mean, look, this sort of educational stuff that we've talked about is probably just as relevant in the investing world as it is in the gambling industry. Is it readily available in a really digestible format? From what I can tell, there aren't very many providers of that. But look, I'm going to focus with this. I think the focus is on the gambling industry. There's a lot of room for improvement for this industry, the tipping service in particular. And I think as you mentioned, there's a significant overlay of the concepts in the gambling industry and the investing world more generally that can be very useful for people, especially in that applied context where concepts really do come to life.
So tell me what's on the agenda for Edge Alerter moving forward? What's, whether it's in this space or even branching out more broadly in the gambling world, what's interesting enough to take up your time, given obviously your background? There's plenty of different areas and things you've spent time on, but is Edge Alerter something that can be longer term, that you can sort of carry forward and expand and grow, and will be something you'll be able to focus on fully?
So I guess two parts. On the tipping side, things are going really well. The system's continuing to perform. We're winning at 30% profit on turnover. Members are averaging over $700 a week in profit, assuming $50 units. We've never had a losing month. Our sharp ratio's in excess of 40. So, look, based on those numbers, we're the best tipping service in Australia, and we've got the track record to prove that. So we'll naturally continue to do that, while also looking out for new edges. So that's on the tipping side. Then on the education side, and I guess, Jake, we've talked about a lot of these already, but if I was to summarize what we're doing there, the goal is pretty simple. We're just empowering our members to approach betting more like a professional trader to increase their chances of success. We've already done a solid job of building out this platform of tools and education that I've already talked about or touched on, and the members already love that, but in 2021 we'll really be taking that to the next level. It's a pretty well known fact that only 1% of bettors out there beat the bookies in the long term. We'd love to push that to more like 10%.
Just one final question I want to throw at you is around the difference you're seeing even so far between racing and sport. And I don't know if there's a huge difference in what you're trying to do on either, but have you found people are more interested in sport these days, or is racing still pretty dominant? And just the way the betting markets structure up, obviously in sports it's usually 1v1 type thing, whether it's a tennis match, 2 players, or an NBA game with 2 teams. But does racing lend itself better towards this type of thing, or do you think there is a real future now, the way sports is headed and the trajectory of a lot more sporting content out there, that this is something that works just as well on the sports side?
Look, for us, it comes down to what promotions are out there as well. So because we do focus heavily on those, that's where the huge edge is. So it's really driven by that. As far as just general interest, from what we can tell, at least from our members, the interest is probably 50-50 as far as racing and sport goes. But as far as just being at the core of what we're doing, we're just identifying where the big scalable edge is. And at the moment, that is a bit more heavily weighted towards racing at the moment.
Got it. Okay. And how do people try it out? If they want to take a look, what's the best way? Is it the website? Is it through Twitter? If they want to ask a question or two to you, is there a good way to reach out?
Yeah, so feel free to get in touch with us on Facebook, Edge Alerter. You can message us on Twitter. Again, the handle is Edge Alerter. You can email us at info@edgealerter.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Jonas, thank you very much for your time. It was fun chatting about all those different aspects, and I wish you very much the best of luck with Edge Alerter, and hopefully you can help many punters out there.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake, for having me. And I just want to say, well done on getting your podcast where it is today. Like as we've discussed, the industry is full of noise, so we do need players like yourself out there having really good conversations with people in the industry to keep it moving forward.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.